It goes. Oh, now it says we're on air.
Are we on air? We're here? Sweet.
Hey.
What's going on, everyone? We need our third musketeer.
Begin.
All right. Who's leading this? Am I leading? Am I going to? Okay.
Yeah.
So, welcome everybody to our weekly Filabot Live. Thanks for tuning in or watching later, however you are enjoying this, learning this, whatever verb we want to use. Today we're going to talk about getting the most out of your extruder, whether that's a Filabot unit, hopefully it is, and if it's not, that's okay, but we're still going to give you some advice, some things that we've learned here working with our extruders, other extruders, and just give you some tips and some tricks. So,
All right.
The first thing we'll talk about, plastics, how they operate differently and everything. So if we consider, ABS or PLA or, like the tons of different stuff that can go in a hopper, like what, let's say someone's gonna, they buy an EX2 and they set it up and they've got a bunch of different pellets and they know nothing.
Well,
What advice would you give them when they're extruding one plastic over another?
Well, in that case, I would definitely suggest just sticking to one at a time. Definitely don't mix them.
You're not going to make some like super filament
No.
by putting everything in. It's not like the fancy soda machines.
No, plabs doesn't work very well.
PLA, ABS.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well.
Okay.
I've been there, tried that. Yeah, pretty much stick to one type of polymer, and then when you're done that one polymer, use our purge compound and clean the entire machine out before you start the other one. It really just helps separate which polymers work.
What's the best one to start with if you don't have any experience?
ABS is probably the easiest to run because the melt temp is so low, and our machines they can produce it pretty easily. It doesn't stick to anything.
Easier to handle when it comes out.
It's definitely easier. You're not burning your fingers as much like PLA. I mean, you're supposed to wear gloves. Wear gloves.
Does it matter what kind of gloves? Like those
haven't
rubberized ones versus, like leather gloves or
I wouldn't
something?
use rubber ones because you hit the rubber ones too hot, they'll just melt to your hand. So I definitely wouldn't use rubber gloves.
That's a good tip.
Those ones we have, I think, are cotton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Those
got
like
some
the
cotton
cheap,
gloves.
those
Yeah.
cheap brown like gardening gloves?
No, I mean, those could be polyester if you get the wrong ones. But yeah, cotton gloves. Like terry cloth gloves.
Okay. That's a good tip. Don't melt gloves to your hand.
Yep.
Yep.
It's important.
Let's get into our bullet points.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So colorant. It's nice to make colored filament. Have some fun. What do people need to know about adding colorant?
Well, we sell it in master batch, which is concentrated pellets of colorant, and you just mix them in with your pellets, and then when it goes through the extruder, it gets all melted up. But there's kind of a little trick that Josh has learned for mixing.
Yeah.
Mix master Josh.
So usually these are 25 grams, which for black we only mix at 1% with ABS, which equals out to 5 pounds of base resin. So here I got 5 pounds ABS and then one of our colorant packs. Dump it right in there, and then close the bag up, and pretty much just turn it, mix it, try to get it evenly mixed.
It's a good way to mix it because you can kind of see all the way around it.
So
As opposed to like trying to mix it with a stick in a jar.
Right.
or even worse, right? Like going, oh shoot, I should have put
Yeah.
the pellets in and just trying to mix it up. Definitely don't do that while plugged in
Yeah,
or
because
on.
you'll get inconsistent color and
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
if you do
like
that,
pale,
dump it back out.
We
Yep.
have a question.
Okay.
So,
So this guy says, awesome, I get to catch you guys live for the first time. Have you thought about making a pellet extruder to mount on a 3D printer directly?
Considered it. People have done it.
Yeah. Let's get through this. If there are questions that come in that seem in line, I left a couple copies of the outline. If there are questions that come in kind of in line with what we're talking about, let's take those then. Otherwise, let's save them for the end.
So,
So let's talk more about that in a few minutes. Is there anything else around colorant that people need to know? Obviously, you have to have the right kind of colorant. You're not going to mix PLA colorant with ABS pellets.
no. Another good thing to do is use one of our melt filters. It just helps compact everything up in the screw, and it just mushes the colorant more into the base resin. Just gives you more of a even flow of color.
Yeah, sometimes you get color that's kind of sticking to the screw, and it kind of comes off the screw in like a little line, kind of like coming out of a toothpaste tube when you have different colors. And if you have a melt filter, you can kind of break those up, and they mix a little better.
Okay.
Yep.
It works pretty well.
Nice. All right. How much plastic do people really need? You know, I mean, we talk about the capacity of the EX6 and how much more it is than the EX2, but when people are, I mean, really this is kind of a pre-purchase decision. To go from, you know, a big bag of pellets and looking at that and then looking at this, you know, I mean, we kind of live in this stuff, so we think in these ways, but other folks might not. How do they decide? How much plastic are they going to be using?
Well, if you're learning, starting out, you might take a little bit to figure out how everything works. You might go through a half a pound or something.
There might be
you know.
some waste.
Yeah, there might be some waste if you're just learning how to use it, or if you're dealing with a polymer that maybe doesn't have a lot of information on extruding it or something like that. But generally, when you start, you want to fill the hopper all the way up.
Okay.
And that'll be plenty to get you started and get a good spool going. If you're floor spooling, it doesn't matter, but
Okay.
yeah. Generally, when you start the machine, you want to fill the whole hopper up, because if you run out, you'll end up with an air pocket in your screw, and you'll get a little pop at the end, and your filament will be
Ruined.
two different pieces.
How much, like, the size of this hopper? You know, how many times you said that's what, 5 pound bag?
Yep.
So 5 pounds versus.
About a half a pound here.
Okay.
So
Yep. So, I mean, if you buy our 2.5 kilogram bags, you'll probably get roughly 4 pounds if you keep it constantly running after you first start it up. Our 1 kilogram bags is probably good for one spool if you're just starting and you're learning the whole startup. You'll get one running and you'll probably have enough to make one full 1 pound spool.
Okay. Nice. What are some of the things that people need to consider when they're extruding different types of plastic? Obviously, there's different temperatures, but what else is there? I mean, you know, we spend a lot of time experimenting and testing different types of polymers in here. So what can we share with people?
PLA can be tricky. It's a higher melt temp. It becomes sticky. It leaves a little bit of residue. It'll just leave a little bit on the fans, which ends up building up, and then it just sticks right to it. And
yeah, where it's hot and it's
that'll
running
ruin it.
against something,
Yeah.
it'll build up. Not when it's cool.
Right.
It's fine, but if it's hot and it's running against something, it may seem fine. It'll be running smooth against it, and then like 15 minutes later, it might just stick to it and then pull apart.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a slight residue buildup on whatever it's running against while it's hot.
So that's a consideration as to where you're placing the extruder.
Yeah.
You know, what's there, whether you're, you know, using something like an air path or floor spooling or
Yeah,
whatever.
you can do things like adding Teflon tape to stuff to make it not stick. You can, if you're using an air path, you can turn the fans up so it's kind of floating above whatever guides you have and just barely touching them. But generally, you want to try to not have anything touching the filament until it's slightly cool on the outside.
Okay.
Just with all types of polymers.
Okay. When you say slightly cool, what's that mean? Is that a number?
Just basically, it's not really a number. You can't really define it like that. But the outside kind of gets. Josh deals with it all the time. So
I would say if you can squeeze it with your fingers and it doesn't mold to the shape of your fingers,
yeah,
I guess that would probably be all right.
it might be slightly pliable, but not squishy.
Right.
And that applies for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were just talking
Well,
about.
PLA really is the only one that has a lot of resin.
Okay.
build up, I guess, after the nozzle. ABS just seems fine. It slides right across just about anything. As long as
Petroleum.
it's- Yeah.
Dead dinosaurs.
Is there anything to know? Do you have any hacks like that for ABS? Anything people need to know?
As long as you're not maxing the extruder out, I'd go as low a temp as you can.
Okay.
Just makes it easier before it either hits the ground or goes through the spooler. It doesn't mold to anything you're touching.
What about some of the other more, I mean, I know those are the most common plastics, but some of the ones that aren't quite obscure, anything that people might be watching thinking, oh, what about X?
Colorant affects your
Yeah,
extrusion
okay.
settings a little bit.
It does.
Okay. How, in what way?
Changes your melt flow.
Yeah. I mean, like our PET colorant, actually, we have to run considerably amount, like higher, probably 20°C higher in temp just to get the colorant to mix in with the normal pellets.
Yeah.
Which in turn makes it hotter coming out, which makes it stickier, which means you gotta have the fans going higher. I've actually had to put a little mini fan before it even hits the other fans because it's really hot. Yeah,
Okay.
cooling is a big thing
Yep.
with anything.
Cooling and then speed. So with all polymers, it's kind of you want to be at the point where it's melting it and you're not getting unmelted bits of polymer and you're not causing really high strain on your motor, like you don't hear it cutting out and stuff because it has a current limiter and all our machines are current limited. If you hear the motor cutting out, your temperature is probably too low. But you don't want it to be too high that you can't handle the filament after it comes out the end of the extruder.
Okay. Awesome.
So those are the two big things.
All right. Now, obviously, the best results would come in some kind of clean room, no, consistent temperature and no breezes and dirt and no humidity and everything. But that's not the real world. So what things should people consider dealing with temperature and humidity and dust in the air when they're doing this?
You want to talk about the condition of your pellets?
Yeah, definitely the pellets is the main thing, is where you store them. I definitely would store them in a plastic container with at least some desiccants. Here we have a dryer, so we dry all of our pellets. So you stick it at a certain temperature, it just sucks all the moisture out. And then we store it in basically vacuum sealed drums. And so no moisture gets back in, and we could just open the drums up and use it.
Is there a way somebody could kind of do some drying on their own? Like, can they use an oven?
You can
Oh
use an
yeah,
oven.
definitely.
Okay.
Yep.
A lot of people do that.
Okay.
That's a great
What
option.
kind of temperature are we talking?
Usually you'll find that on the data sheet for the polymer. They actually will have a temperature setting for your dryer. And if you use that in your oven, just set your oven to that temperature and put your polymer out on a tray. Usually it's nice, works really well. Not just in a bin or something, but like laid out, spread out on a tray. It'll dry reasonably well.
Okay.
Not quite to the level of like a double bed desiccant dryer, which is what we have, but it'll be plenty for extruding. It'll process fine.
What about with like a food dehydrator?
Yep, that's actually what one of our customers uses.
Really? Okay.
But yeah,
So,
one of our
there
local
you go.
customers
If you
uses
have a
it.
dehydrator sitting on your counter that you haven't used in 20 years because you thought you were going to
Yep.
make jerky, but you don't,
Use it
Perfect.
for pellets.
use it for pellets.
Yep.
Okay. If somebody, like if pellets get dirty or something, like is there something you can do other than throw it out?
Dirty?
You
No,
would have
like-
to melt filter it.
Okay.
Yeah. it
Unless you want to
depends
clean
on-
every pellet individually.
Okay.
Right. What kind of dirty are you?
I was thinking,
talking?
like you talked about drying them and then putting them in a sealed container. If somebody did that
Spills
and
it.
forgot to put the top back on and comes
Oh.
back 3 weeks later, and maybe they're in a space kind of like this, it gets a little dusty.
Yeah, at that point, I'd recommend a melt filter.
Okay.
Yeah,
No.
just the nozzle one.
It's
But
it's
then-
not worth trying to power through and just crossing your fingers.
No, because you're gonna get something that if you're using a point form nozzle on your extruder or on your printer extruder, you're probably gonna clog it.
Okay.
So, yeah, definitely use a melt filter. We recommend using one all the time just in case, because like you said, if it's any remotely dirty, which most places are, there's a chance of getting something in the hopper.
And melt filter doesn't hurt anything. If anything, it just makes things
Yeah,
better.
it actually
building,
improves the output.
building
But-
pressure and everything.
If you're like sweeping it off the floor, because we've gotten ones where the shipping company broke the bag open, swept it off the floor of whatever shop it was in, dumped it back in a container and sent it to us, and obviously we couldn't use it at all. It got like pieces of glass in it and like like large chunks of glass and like pieces off some floor. They swept it off.
Oh wow.
That you would need a large melt filter.
Okay.
So, I mean, you could pick through it, do a pretty good job, but it'd be tough.
Okay.
Keep it clean.
Now, what about where to set this stuff up? I mean, obviously, you know, you're probably not going to want to put it on the floor. You're not going to want to put it overhead, but, you know, I'm sure that, you know, you both have set up extruders in a bunch of different spots. You know, like we've got stuff on this bench. We've got benches at different height. Are there any considerations there?
That mostly when you're floor spooling, you need to worry about the height of the table.
Okay.
With a spooler, it's fine. I mean, whatever's more comfortable for you, just so you're not trying to spool up here or down here or whatever.
Right.
But for floor spooling, you want to have enough time before the filament hits the floor that it's already cool.
Okay. What kind of time? What kind of height are we talking?
I mean, generally we're running about 3 to 3.5 feet off of the ground.
Okay.
And that seems to work for PLA and ABS pretty well. But honestly, we don't do much floor spooling. We got the spoolers, so.
Is there a point where it becomes too much, where the weight becomes too much and it's too much strain as it's coming out?
I think that's more of a temperature issue, because if it's molten when it comes out of the nozzle, it doesn't really matter how far you are from the ground, it's still gonna just pull on it. So that's more of what temperature you're running for the polymer.
Okay.
Big limitation with polymers too that are really soft when they come out. You can't really floor spool with them because you were trying to rely on both the gravity of the weight of the filament till it reaches the floor, and then the amount of cooling capacity you have. So you're limited in two factors.
If someone's starting out, you know, and they're pinching pennies, you know, hopefully someday they'll buy a spool or they'll buy an air path. But if they've got a floor spool to start, what's the easiest polymer to work with?
ABS again.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
It's pretty much ABS across the board, right? If you're starting out, that's where you want to make your investment.
Yeah, it's not the easiest to print with,
Okay.
just because you need the heated bed and everything. But other than that, for extruding purposes, ABS is definitely easiest.
Okay. Any considerations with power? You know, should these things be on some kind of big surge protector or battery backup, power conditioner? You have to worry about
They're
any of
all
that?
110, and they all have they're all 24 volts, except for the X6, which is 90 volt drive motor, and all the AC to DC conversion conditions the power. So not the extruders. The spooler can take anywhere from 80 volts to 240 volts AC, 50 to 60 hertz. The extruders are limited to either 110 or 120 because they have a heater that's 110 or 120. The EX6 is either not 110 or 120, 120 or 240. The EX6 is the same, 120 or 240 volts.
So bottom line, you don't have to sweat that.
No,
Okay.
no, power is easy, and they're all whatever outlet you can adapt it to.
All right, what about cooling? I mean, we've talked about cooling and the importance of temperature and everything with the actual filament, but what about the machines themselves? They have all the cooling that they need, or, you know, should people set up a couple, you know, like desk fans and like...
I mean, EX6 is pretty well set with that. Has fans everywhere, and you can adjust all of them. The EX2, sometimes you might get a little heat creep after you're running for a long time.
Okay.
Actually, the F that's cut out in the side of our machine is a pretty good area where you can stick a fan up to, and it helps cool the hopper, so you're not building up melted pellets in the hopper.
Okay.
So
Any other suggestions? Like, don't run it in the fridge kind of a thing, but...
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Eventually, we'll have a small kit where you can add a fan with a duct to the feed throat. But we haven't released that yet.
Okay. Cool. But if it does overheat, if you notice that, the best solution is just to...
let it cool down,
yeah.
restart.
Okay. All right, so what about when somebody's starting off and they're getting everything set up and they're just trying to get it ready quickly. You know, you don't want to spend 2 hours testing filament and, it's not ready for the spool yet. You know, how do people know to set, like, what to set the speed or the temperature to on an extruder based on what kind of a polymer it is?
Ideally soon, we're going to have an updated sheet where it'll just be a list of types of polymers and recommended settings for both the EX2 and the EX6. But we're still compiling a large list, as many as we can.
It's a lot of information.
There's a lot of stuff there. A lot of stuff to know.
But generally you start with that. But if you don't know anything,
Testing purposes and stuff, I usually look at the data sheet. It tells you the melt temp. I usually start there. And then just by the look of it, I can tell if it's too hot. Basically, you'll see drooping, or it just blobs up, or it's too cold and it just doesn't extrude. So you just adjust from there. Really start at the melt temp on the data sheets for each.
generally
polymer.
it's cooler than the melt temp on the data sheet though, because you're getting shear heat in the screw.
Yeah.
And the temperature sensors are on the outside of the barrel. So because the screw's turning and creating heat, you'll get more heat inside the barrel where the polymer is than you're actually reading on the heater block. So generally your temperatures on your PIDs are a little bit lower.
So start at melt temp and then work your way down. Usually, it's a good thing to start with.
Okay. And I would expect a lot of people are going to keep notes on this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
if you're doing a bunch of different polymers, just having a notebook and a pen to jot down, I did this and it worked well, I did this and it worked better.
Another thing on the data sheet is they'll usually say if it's for extrusion. And typically if you have a polymer that's not made for extrusion, it's not going to work very well. It's just the design of the polymer. So look for that if you're looking for a new polymer to try out. Check to see because there's usually extrusion grades and injection grades of the same polymer with the same properties. So you just want to look for that.
One of the things we've talked about in previous videos is the idea of keeping filament in spec. You know, what does that mean, and what do we do here to help keep filament in spec and know that it's in spec?
So in-spec for us is plus or minus 0.05 of a millimeter.
That's very small.
It's small. What we do to keep it right around there is we have a few fans. We just make sure the filament's really cool before it hits the spooler. Make sure it's not too hot and sticking anywhere. Make sure the filament's not bouncing between the extruder and the spooler.
Getting crushed in the wheels.
Yeah, right.
So what I'm hearing, it's consistent when it comes out the extruder. It's the stuff that happens outside the extruder that causes the problems.
Yep.
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Really getting the fans dialed in and the spooler speed dialed in is really where you're gonna keep your consistency.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as measuring, generally we measure between the spool and the traverser on the spooler. If you're floor spooling, it's pretty easy because you've got a whole length that you can measure as long as you're careful and don't pull on it or anything.
Right.
Or just measure a coil that's on the floor. But for the spooler, we measure from the spool to here, and it's a pretty quick measurement. If you have if you're handy with dial calipers, you want to get in there and measure quick. There's also on the market, you can find rolling micrometers where it's like a little C thing with, 2 rollers that can measure. And then we've also got an add-on that we're releasing very soon, actually, that bolts onto these 2 bolts here, and has a rolling micrometer and a little tensioner for the filament, and it just sticks right on there. So keep an eye out for that.
Nice. That makes things easier.
Yeah, a lot easier. Plus, you can monitor, while you're extruding.
Okay. And that's kind of our next thing is measuring filament. Like,
Yeah. The only thing I have to add to Kevin's is you want to measure between the traverse and the spool, just because in case the filament is still warm right here, a pair of calipers, you squeeze them too much, it'll
Yeah,
make
if
it
you're
indent
measuring
in the
over
filament.
here.
Yeah, you don't want to do it here or here. You want to do it basically right before it gets to the spool because that's where the filament's the coolest. And you have less chance of making imprints from the calipers.
okay. Makes sense. What do we got to know about measuring other than do it at the last possible point?
It's pretty simple. I mean, you can measure if you want to measure in 2 directions for up roundness. you can, but generally we haven't had much problem with that. And it's funny because you can loop the filament a little bit and turn it and feel if it's not completely round. But that, we've done some testing where it feels like it's not round, but it's within like 0.01 of a millimeter, which doesn't make a difference when you're printing. The main thing is volume, so you don't want to have like thicker and thinner. But if it's all round, it doesn't really make a difference for printing. Not a huge difference.
Right, that makes sense. How about getting the filament started off in the spooler? I mean, we don't want to go too deep in this because we'll do another video where we talk about, the rest of the product line. But we've talked about the spooler a little bit, so let's just, throw people a little bit of a bonus there.
So my biggest tip would be don't bother with all of the magnets and the fans is the first thing if you're using a fan.
But they're there.
Yeah, right. Basically just use, one or two just to keep it, generally over it. You don't have to get it perfect over the fans the first shot. As long as your filament's cool and it's not, falling off the side of the fan and sticking on the table or, just bouncing around everywhere, and you can get it fed into there a lot faster.
Oh, one quick thing back to the cleanliness of your area. If you are using fans, make sure they're not blowing stuff at your filament, because it'll stick to it. And if you have any dirt near melted plastic, it's like glue. It's going to stick to it, and then you're going to have it, clog your printer. If it gets dirty on the wall, it's a Delta printer. It's got giant weights on the sides of it. It's huge. If you were trying to do it in a small form, you'd need like powdered pellets, which aren't super common. We do sell them. But yeah, I believe I saw a video on YouTube of somebody using strips of PET, and they had this weird like little drum thing. If you look around, there are some solutions. People have done it with a rep wrap. They've made little rep wraps, that open source 3D printer. They've made extruder attachments for that. It's very difficult. You have to do a lot of fine tuning.
Could somebody take like one of our extruders and put it up on a shelf, like a high shelf, and come down through and maybe have a couple pulleys and go straight into the printer?
Yeah, it'd be tough, but you can do it.
Okay. So if somebody does that, we definitely want some photos, some video that will.
You could also try to mount one on a printer if you had like some sort of CNC thing, but I wouldn't recommend that. It'd be a lot of hassle.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe we sell our screws on the website. Do we still sell our screws on the website?
Not on the website,
Oh, we don't. But we do sell them. Yeah.
Call us if you want one.
Yeah, if you buy a screw and make your own thing.
Any other questions that came in?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, cool. Anything you guys want to add?
I'm sure we'll think of it after we're done.
We always do.
Yeah.
All right.
So next video.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Whether you're watching live, we appreciate all the live viewers, and if you're watching this later from our website, thanks for checking out, and let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to give us a call. Check us out at filabot.com, and yeah, have a great day.